How could a piece of moldy bread burn an entire village or send another village dancing until its death? Ergotism is a disease that's led to some interesting events throughout history. The two forms of ergotism are theorized to have caused St. Anthony's fire, the witch trials, and the dancing plague of 1518. To start off, we'll first define what ergotism is. Ergotism is a disease caused by a fungus called ergot that grows on grains. It's a dark purple fungus, which in the past has primarily affected rye. It's actually the oldest recorded plant disease, dating as far back as 1100 BCE in China. According to George Wong at the Botanical Institute in Hawaii, the first case of human-related ergotism dates as far back as 857 AD. In the present, ergotism is not really much of a concern. Ergotamine, which is a derivative of ergot, is still present in some migraine medications and antiviral medications, such as those used to treat HIV. However, doctors are trained to look for the signs and symptoms of ergotism, and it's virtually not a concern any longer. Now that we know what ergotamine is, let's discuss the signs and symptoms of ergotism. There are two forms of ergotism. There is gangrenous ergotism and convulsive ergotism. Gangrenous ergotism is a chronic disease, which means it occurs after long-term consumption of ergot. Gangrenous ergotism is a vascular disease, meaning it affects your vascular system and blood flow. It restricts the blood flow mainly in the outer extremities first, and then works its way inwards. In patients who have gangrenous ergotism, they'll end up losing their outer extremities first, such as fingers and toes, eventually their limbs, and sometimes it even leads to death. Gangrenous ergotism is also called St. Anthony's fire, and this is because people who experience it experience burning sensations in their limbs from the restricted blood flow. The other type of ergotism is convulsive ergotism. This is also known as serotonin overload syndrome. Serotonin overload syndrome is an acute condition, meaning you only have to eat ergot one time to experience symptoms. According to visualdx.com, the symptoms of this can include muscle twitching and spasms, hallucinations, convulsions, vomiting, fever, and sweating. Now that we know the symptoms of ergotism, let's go and see what events in history are related to those types. First, we'll start with gangrenous ergotism, which is also called St. Anthony's fire, and I'll tell you why. In France, from medieval times to 1596 AD, citizens would experience gangrenous ergotism symptoms. Back then, citizens thought that they were symptoms of being dragged down to hell, with the burning in the limbs and the falling off of the limbs. It was later determined to be a contaminated rye supply. A group of Benedictine monks decided to build a hospital once they discovered out the cause for this disease. The hospital was named after St. Anthony, who was a Christian monk who had taught them their ways of medical aid. Thus, the disease got its name, St. Anthony's fire. St. Anthony, from the Christian monk, and his hospital dedicated to fix those who were ill, and the fire from those feelings that the citizens experienced in their arms. Next, we'll talk about some occurrences of convulsive ergotism. The first one we'll talk about is the Salem witch trials. Witch trials happened all across the globe in medieval times, particularly in America and Europe. And it's actually found that places who experienced higher rates of witches were more apt to grow rye. In the Salem witch trials particularly, people would experience symptoms of convulsions, delusions, and twitching. Those symptoms were determined to be those who had been bewitched, but really they are similar to the symptoms of ergotism. There's also an interesting occurrence where times where times where times where witching was higher correlated with times where the prices for rye were higher. And that could mean that rye supply was lower and less quality controlled, meaning the percent of ergot found in the rye may have been higher. So it's possible that these witches were actually just suffering from ergotism. The next event I'd like to discuss is the plague of 1518. This plague occurred in Strasbourg, Romania in 1518. And there are records from physicians back then stating that the entire city had nonstop dancing plagues for 2 months, where nearly 400 people died from heart attack and stroke, not being able to stop dancing. In the physician notes, it states that these people had hot blood and they felt the need to gyrate it away. There are many theories on why this phenomenon occurred, but it's possible that it was ergotism. It could be convulsive ergotism causing hallucinations, and it could also be gangrenous ergotism causing the burning feelings in the limbs and the need to dance away the pain. To wrap this all up, ergotism is a grade that has led to some interesting events among our ancestors. This parasitic fungus has certainly left some interesting stories to tell about its unusual vascular and neurological symptoms. So, next time you eat a sandwich, be thankful about the modern technologies and quality control that go into preventing us from losing our minds and our limbs when eating a piece of bread. Thank you. Okay, you can unmute now.
Hi.
Hi.
You did great.